Kindred Soil. The dust cloud behind me had dissipated long before I turned onto the private road that led to the Blackwood ranch. I'd been driving for 7 hours straight, my Tesla's navigation having guided me through the labyrinth of West Texas highways with clinical precision. The battery indicator showed 18% remaining, plenty to reach the main house, but cutting it closer than I'd planned. Another thing to add to my list of concerns. "You have arrived at your destination," the car's system announced, its voice artificially warm. Not my destination, I thought. Just where I came from. The iron archway that marked the entrance to Blackwoods' 300,000 acres loomed ahead, the family crest, a lone mesquite tree against a setting sun, displayed prominently at its center. In the gathering dusk, the ranch unfolded before me, endless pastures, the distant silhouettes of oil pumps nodding in slow rhythm, solar arrays gleaming in the last rays of daylight, and somewhere beyond the horizon, thousands of cattle that had built the Blackwood empire. I eased off the accelerator, letting the car drift forward. No rush now. I delayed my arrival long enough to miss the early afternoon commotion of family arrivals, but not so late that I'd catch hell for missing pre-dinner drinks. The perfect middle ground, a space I'd mastered navigating as the third of 5 children. My phone buzzed. "Jackson, where you at, Addie?" My younger brother's text read. "Mom's asking." Dad's pretending not to. I didn't respond. Jackson would cover for me. He always did. As the main complex came into view, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. The Blackwood compound was an architectural contradiction, a sprawling ranch house built in the 1880s that had been expanded, renovated, and modernized until it resembled something from an Architectural Digest, yet still somehow retained its weathered soul. Tonight, every window blazed with light, the parking area already filled with vehicles, gleaming luxury SUVs, custom trucks with price tags that could feed a small town for a year, and, incongruously among them, my brother Wyatt's battered Ford F-250, the same one he'd been driving since high school. I pulled my Tesla alongside it, the sleek white electric vehicle a stark contrast to his mud-splattered truck. As I reached for my overnight bag, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. Adelaide Blackwood, 35, former Miss Junior West Texas, ex-rodeo champion, recently divorced. My hair was shorter now, cut to my shoulders the day after Marissa had left, but my face was the same. Too much like Dad's for my own good, as Mom often said. The front door opened before I'd even reached the porch steps, and Wyatt's imposing figure filled the doorway. At 40, my older brother still looked like the champion bronc rider he'd once been, broad-shouldered and raw-boned, with permanent lines etched around his eyes from squinting against the sun. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. "About time," he said, taking my bag from me. "Thought maybe you'd changed your mind." "And miss out on the annual Blackwood bloodbath?" "Not a chance." His mouth quirked. "You parked that liberal mobile next to my truck on purpose, didn't you?" "Figured it'd give Dad something to focus on besides my love life," I replied, following him inside. "Smart. He's already had 2 whiskeys." The entryway opened to the great room where most of the family had gathered. The space was cavernous, with a stone fireplace that could have roasted an entire steer dominating one wall. My mother spotted me immediately, detaching herself from a conversation with my sister-in-law to make her way toward me. "Adelaide," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Chanel and white wine. "You made it." Martha Blackwood was 65 and looked 50, thanks to excellent genes, better skincare, and a surgeon in Dallas she visited twice a year. She held me at arm's length, her assessment swift and comprehensive. "You look tired," she concluded, "but the haircut suits you." Before I could respond, my father's voice boomed across the room. "Is that my rodeo girl finally showing up?" Robert Blackwood rose from his chair by the fire, whiskey in hand. At 70, he was still barrel-chested and commanding, his silver hair thick, his face tanned and lined from decades spent more outdoors than in. He was wearing what he always wore: jeans, boots, and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle. "Hi, Dad," I said, crossing to kiss his cheek. "You're late," he said, but there was no real admonishment in it. "And I see you're still driving that battery on wheels." "It gets me where I need to go," I replied mildly. "Until it doesn't," he countered, but his eyes were twinkling. This was an old argument, worn comfortable with repetition. "You'll be stranded in the middle of nowhere someday, and then what?" "Then I'll call one of my rich family members to come get me." He laughed, a sound like gravel. "Fair enough. Drink?" And just like that, I was absorbed back into the Blackwood orbit. Jackson, 33, unmarried, and the family peacekeeper materialized at my elbow with a glass of bourbon. My younger sister Eliza glanced up from her phone long enough to wave from her position on the couch, her twin toddlers climbing over her like energetic puppies. My oldest brother James was deep in conversation with his wife near the window, gesticulating in a way that suggested the topic was either politics or college football, the two subjects that animated him most. "Aunt Addie." A small projectile collided with my legs. I looked down to find my 7-year-old niece, Lily, beaming up at me. "Did you bring me anything?" "Lily," James's wife Caroline called out. "That's rude." "It's fine," I said, crouching down. And of course I did. "It's in my bag. I'll give it to you after dinner, okay?" Lily nodded solemnly, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "Is Marissa coming?" A sharp pain lanced through my chest. "No, sweetheart. Remember I told you? Marissa and I aren't married anymore." "Because she kissed a boy?" Lily asked, loud enough to draw several pairs of eyes our way. "Something like that," I said, straightening up. "Hey, why don't you go ask Grandpa to show you his new pocket watch? He loves showing it off." As Lily scampered away, I caught Wyatt's eye across the room. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, then jerked his head toward the kitchen. I followed him, grateful for the escape. The kitchen was a chaos of activity. 3 caterers moved efficiently around the massive space, putting final touches on what smelled like enough food to feed a small army. But it was the figure at the far end of the room, hunched over something on the counter, who caught my attention. "Hey, Doc," Wyatt called. Samuel Reeves straightened to his full height, which was considerable. At nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders like barn doors, he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the pendant lights. He'd worked on the ranch for as long as I could remember, following in his father's footsteps, but in a quintessentially Sam way, he hadn't been content to just be a ranch hand. He'd gotten his PhD in veterinary science through online courses while continuing to work full-time, proving to everyone that his physical presence was matched by his intellect. "Wyatt," he acknowledged, then his eyes found mine. "Adelaide." There was a wealth of history in the way he said my name. We'd grown up together, in a sense, him as the ranch hand's son, me as the ranch owner's daughter, a divide that had seemed uncrossable when we were younger. Yet somewhere along the way, that divide had narrowed, though neither of us had ever quite been brave enough to bridge it. "Sam," I said, "what are you working on?" He gestured to a mixing bowl. "Gravy. Your mother asked me to fix it. Too lumpy, apparently." I smiled despite myself. It was so typically Sam, capable of performing emergency surgery on a prize bull 1 minute and rescuing Thanksgiving gravy the next. "How's it going out there?" he asked, nodding toward the great room. "It's early yet," Wyatt answered for me. "Give it an hour. Once Dad gets onto Biden's economic legacy, all hell will break loose. Or when Uncle Thomas starts in on Trump again," I added. But my money's on Aunt Patricia bringing up her theories about the election before the turkey's even carved. Sam's gaze lingered on me, his expression unreadable. "Heard about Marissa," he said finally. "Sorry." 10 simple words that had nothing to do with Marissa and everything to do with the unfinished business between us. She'd always known how I felt about Sam, even before I did. It had been one of the agreements in our open marriage. I didn't get jealous of her occasional male partners, and she didn't question what Sam meant to me, even though nothing had ever happened between us. "It is what it is," I said, reaching for the whisk in his hand. "Let me help with that gravy." Our fingers brushed, and I felt the familiar spark of awareness I'd been fighting since I was 16. I pulled back quickly, but not before catching the knowing look Wyatt shot my way. "I should get back," Wyatt said. "Dad's probably cornered some poor soul about renewable energy credits by now." As he left, I turned to Sam. "How are things on the ranch?" "Busy," he replied, his focus returning to the gravy. "We've got a new herd of Black Angus settling in on the north pasture. The drought hasn't hit us as hard as some, but we're watching the water tables. And we've had a mountain lion problem this fall." I absorbed this information, feeling the pull of the land even after years away. I might have left the ranch for Austin, might have built a life as an art gallery owner that had nothing to do with cattle or oil or the endless Texas sky, but the ranch was in my blood. "How about you?" Sam asked. "The gallery doing okay?" "It's good," I said. "We just hosted a show for a new artist. Indigenous sculptures, very powerful work." He nodded, as though running an art gallery made perfect sense for someone who had once been able to rope a calf in under 8 seconds. And maybe with Sam, it did make sense. He'd always seen me more clearly than most. The dinner bell rang, an actual brass bell that had been in the family for generations, calling us to the enormous dining room. The Blackwood Thanksgiving dinner was a production worthy of a stage manager. 23 of us seated around a table that could have hosted the Last Supper with room to spare, with the patriarch at the head and the hierarchy fanning out from there. I found my place card between Jackson and my 16-year-old niece Emma. Wyatt was directly across from me, and Sam, who had been part of Thanksgiving dinner since his father died 12 years ago, was seated at the far end with the ranch managers and their spouses. The distance felt deliberate. The meal progressed as it always did. Dad carved the turkey with ceremonial precision. Mom orchestrated the passing of dishes with the efficiency of an air traffic controller. Wine flowed, children squirmed, and conversation remained carefully neutral until the third round of drinks. It was my Uncle Thomas who broke the détente, as Wyatt had predicted. "So, Adelaide," he said, stabbing a piece of turkey, "still driving that Musk mobile even after he's become the darling of the right wing?" I felt every eye at the table swivel toward me. This was how it always started, a seemingly innocuous question loaded with political subtext. "It's a good car, Uncle Thomas," I replied evenly. And I try not to base my transportation choices on the CEO's latest tweet. "But surely," my Aunt Patricia chimed in, "you must feel a bit conflicted now, given your political leanings." "Patricia," my mother warned. "What?" "I'm just saying that Adelaide has always been so outspoken about her progressive views. It must be difficult to reconcile that with supporting Musk's companies now that he's practically a Republican mascot." I took a sip of wine, using the moment to gather my thoughts. "I've been thinking about trading it in, actually. But not because of politics. The range just isn't practical for Texas distances." "Huh," my father exclaimed triumphantly, finally seeing reason. "Though I'm looking at the new Ford Lightning," I added, watching his face fall. "All-electric pickup. Better range, and it can power a house during an outage." Speaking of outages, my brother James cut in. "Did you all see that the grid almost failed again last month? If we hadn't had those nuclear plants online." "Nuclear's the past," Dad interrupted. "We need to be investing in more natural gas infrastructure. Cleaner than coal, provides jobs, and we've got plenty of it right here in Texas." "Until we don't," Jackson countered. "Renewables the future, Dad." "You know it is. That's why you let that solar company lease the southwest corner of the ranch." "That was a business decision," Dad huffed. "Tax incentives were too good to pass up." "Which were put in place by the administration you voted against," Eliza pointed out, looking up from feeding her youngest. And with that, the floodgates opened. The conversation fractured into multiple heated debates about energy policy, the economy, immigration, last year's election results. Traditional fault lines emerged. The older generation versus the younger, conservatives versus progressives, with a few wild cards thrown in to keep things interesting. I caught Wyatt's eye across the table. He hadn't said a word, just kept eating methodically, passing dishes when asked, occasionally nodding to acknowledge he was listening. But I knew he was taking it all in, forming his own opinions that he rarely shared. I glanced down the table toward Sam, only to find him already watching me. He gave me a small smile, commiseration for the familiar family dynamics playing out. Suddenly, the heated discussions were interrupted by the shrill ring of a phone. Sam pulled his cell from his pocket, frowning at the display before answering. "Reeves," he said, then listened intently. His expression darkened. "How many? When did it start?" "No, don't move them. I'll be right there." He ended the call and stood up abruptly. "Mr. Blackwood, we've got a situation at the North Pasture. 3 cows down, more showing symptoms. Sounds like toxic feed." The transformation at the table was immediate. Family squabbles were instantly forgotten as the ranchers among us snapped to attention. "How many head in that pasture?" Dad asked, already on his feet. 217, Sam replied. "New shipment of hay went out yesterday." "That new supplier from Oklahoma?" Wyatt asked sharply. Sam nodded. "Damn it," Dad muttered. "I told James we should have stuck with Harmon's." "We can assign blame later," Mom interjected firmly. "Right now we need to handle the situation." "I'll get the trucks ready," Wyatt said, pushing back from the table. "I'll come with you," I found myself saying. "Adelaide," my mother began, "you don't need to." "I know how to work a ranch, Mom," I cut her off. "I'll make sure they have enough medical supplies." Dad gave me an approving nod. "James, call Robertson and have him meet us out there with extra hands. Jackson, we'll need the portable pens set up to isolate the affected animals." Within minutes, Thanksgiving dinner had been abandoned. Those with ranch experience were heading for the door, while others stayed behind to manage the children and keep track of information. The division happened naturally, without discussion roles that had been established through years of living on and running the ranch together. I changed quickly into jeans and boots. I'd packed more out of habit than intention, then joined Wyatt and Sam at the equipment barn. The familiar smell of hay, oil, and leather enveloped me as I entered, triggering a rush of muscle memory. This had been my world once. "You remember how to drive this thing?" Wyatt asked, tossing me the keys to a UTV. "Like riding a bike," I replied, catching them one-handed. "Load up the medical supplies in the back," Sam directed, already filling containers with activated charcoal, saline bags, and various medications. "We need to move fast." The urgency of the situation left no room for awkwardness or past complications. We worked in efficient silence, falling into a rhythm that transcended our personal histories. Within 20 minutes, a convoy of vehicles was heading toward the North Pasture, Dad and James in the lead truck, Wyatt and Jackson following in another, Sam in his veterinary vehicle, and me bringing up the rear in the UTV loaded with supplies. The North Pasture was chaos when we arrived. The ranch hands already on site had separated the obviously sick animals, but more were showing symptoms by the minute. The affected cattle were staggering, some already down, their breathing labored. Sam took charge immediately, his height making him visible to everyone across the pasture. "We need to identify and isolate every animal that's had access to the new hay," he called out. "Set up a triage system, critical cases here, showing symptoms but still standing there, and unaffected but potentially exposed in the far pen." "What are we dealing with, Doc?" Dad asked as we gathered around one of the downed cows. Sam was already examining the animal, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he checked its vitals. "My guess is mold toxins in the hay, maybe ergot alkaloids. We need to get activated charcoal into every affected animal immediately, then supportive care, fluids, anti-inflammatories." "Will they make it?" James asked, the financial implications clear in his tone. Some will, some won't, Sam replied bluntly. Depends how much they ingested and how quickly we can treat them. What do you need from us? I asked. Sam looked at me, his expression softening just slightly. You are always good with the stomach tube. I need you to administer the charcoal slurry to the critical cases while I start 4 fluids. And just like that, I was back in the life I'd left behind. For the next several hours, we worked against time and fading daylight. The family that had been bickering over politics at dinner was now a seamless team, Dad and James directing the ranch hands to move unaffected cattle to fresh pasture, Wyatt and Jackson setting up temporary pens and organizing the hay removal, and me working alongside Sam to treat the sick animals. The physical labor was exhausting but familiar, my body remembering skills I hadn't used in years. At one point, Sam and I worked side by side to intubate a particularly valuable breeding cow, our hands occasionally brushing, communication reduced to essential words and nods. Hold her head steady, he murmured, and I adjusted my grip, feeling the cow's labored breathing. Got it, I replied, watching as he expertly inserted the tube down the animal's throat. When the procedure was complete, he caught my eye. You haven't lost your touch. Some things you don't forget, I said, and we both knew I wasn't just talking about ranch work. By midnight, we had stabilized the situation. 7 cows had been lost, but the rest were responding to treatment. The contaminated hay had been identified and quarantined, and a rotating schedule had been set up to monitor the affected animals through the night. Dad called for a break, and we gathered around the tailgate of his truck, passing around thermoses of coffee and the sandwiches Mom had sent out with a ranch hand an hour earlier. The night air was cold, and I shivered despite my exertion. Without a word, Wyatt shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was a simple gesture, but so typical of him. Few words, direct action, unfailing support. Thanks, I said, leaning slightly against his solid frame. He just nodded, sipping his coffee. Dad looked around at all of us, his expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Good work tonight, everyone. This could have been much worse. We should build a bonfire, Jackson suggested suddenly. It's freezing out here, and we'll be more comfortable while we wait. The idea caught on quickly. Within 20 minutes, a roaring fire was blazing in a cleared area near the pens, and we had dragged over some logs to sit on. Someone produced a cooler of beer that had been intended for after Thanksgiving dinner, and we settled around the flames, the crisis averted, but the night not yet over. The firelight cast flickering shadows across familiar faces. Dad and James were discussing insurance implications in low voices. Jackson was texting Mom with updates. Wyatt sat beside me in companionable silence, occasionally poking at the fire with a stick. And Sam, after checking on the critical cases one more time, had taken a seat on the opposite side of the circle, his massive frame hunched slightly against the cold. Remember the year the creek flooded? Jackson said suddenly, and we all had to move those sheep in the middle of the night? You were, what, 12? James laughed. Mom was so mad that Dad woke you kids up to help. We needed all hands, Dad said, unrepentant. And they learned more that night than a week in school. I remember Addie refusing to go back inside even after everything was safe, Wyatt added, with a rare smile. Said she was going to sleep in the barn with the lambs to make sure they were okay. I was 9, I protested, but I was smiling too. And I was worried about them. The conversation drifted, memories surfacing like embers from the fire, the blizzard of '08, the summer drought that had nearly bankrupted the ranch before the oil was discovered. The time Wyatt and I had gotten lost on horseback and spent the night in an abandoned line shack. These shared experiences had shaped us all, I realized. For all our differences, political, personal, philosophical, we were bound together by this land and what it had taught us. Work hard. Protect what matters. Show up when needed. These lessons ran deeper than the grievances and conflicts that dominated our dinner table conversations. I looked across the fire at Sam, finding his eyes already on me. 10 years of marriage to Marissa, 10 years of building a life away from the ranch, and still this pull between us remained, unresolved but undeniable. I wondered if tonight had changed anything, if seeing me back in this world where we had first connected might shift the careful balance we'd maintained for so long. As if reading my thoughts, he raised his beer bottle slightly in my direction, the gesture both a question and an acknowledgement. I returned it, feeling something settle inside me. There would be time to figure that out. For now, this was enough being here, under the vast Texas sky, with people who knew every version of me. The night grew colder, but the fire kept us warm. The conversation ebbed and flowed, occasionally touching on the disagreements from dinner, but without the same heat. Context mattered, and out here, with the reminder of what we could accomplish together, the differences seemed less important. A sudden laugh from James broke through my thoughts. He was recounting some ridiculous mishap from our childhood, embellishing shamelessly, and soon everyone was joining in, adding details and corrections to the story. Something welled up inside me then, a feeling so strong it demanded expression. I looked around at my family, difficult, complicated, infuriating, and absolutely essential to who I was. "Goddamn, we make a fine team," I blurted out, the words escaping before I could temper them. A moment of startled silence, then Dad raised his beer. "That we do, Adelaide. That we do." "Even if some of us drive electric vehicles," Jackson added with a smirk. "And vote for Democrats," James chimed in. "And refuse to get married and produce grandchildren," Wyatt said dryly, referencing his own choices. Just like that, the moment tipped from sincere to teasing, laughter rippling around the circle. More stories emerged, jokes were cracked at each other's expense, and the night stretched on, the stars wheeling overhead and the cattle safe in their pens. Tomorrow, we would return to the house and the half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner. We would resume our arguments and nurse our old grievances. But something had shifted, a reminder of what we were when necessities stripped away the pretense. I caught Sam watching me again, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Tomorrow would bring questions and complications. Tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be under a Texas sky, surrounded by the contradictions and certainties of family, with possibilities I hadn't considered in years suddenly feeling within reach again.